Everyone talks about the best rock albums ever made and who made them, but what about the best debut rock albums? The ones that set the stage for a band to become stars while becoming benchmarks in music history as an album. This video is going to count down the top 10 best debut rock albums. Ranking debut albums through generations is difficult, but keep in mind this is just an opinion and all of these albums are truly fantastic. There's a reason why they are the best. Rules for the list. I'm keeping this primarily in the rock category, so something in punk, metal, industrial like Nine Inch Nails. I'm not counting just to help narrow the playing field down a bit. Still love Pretty Hate Machine though. I'm also not including supergroups for the same reason, just to narrow choices down, so something like Audioslave's self-titled will not be found here. Finally, no EPs, just full long play albums. Please like and subscribe, it does help a ton. You know how these videos work. Let's get counting down. Classic rock has many generations as the decades go on. When you think about classic rock and how long some of those bands lasted and which started in the 70s, AC/DC's longevity was the stuff of legend. Considering all the changes AC/DC had, the band sound never strayed far from the sound of High Voltage. This proved Australia can make it massive in the sleazy world of rock and roll. You know why this is one of the best debut rock albums ever? It's because it gave rock a dynamic, instantly associable sound and band in AC/DC. Bon Scott's voice became iconic and the Youngs became guitar idols. First released in Australia and then internationally, High Voltage was that shock that rock needed. At the time, this was the sleaze, the sleaziest form of rock and roll. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was personified by songs like TNT and the offensive She's Got Balls. What happened out of that loud, shedding, obnoxious filth? A standard for rock music and heroes to teenagers the world over that played this album on repeat in the 1970s. It's a long way to the top. AC/DC understood that over the decades and still pushed to stay there. One of the biggest best-selling bands of all time makes that long way to the top even longer. High Voltage and AC/DC are understandably not everyone's style, but High Voltage is understandably that important in rock history, especially for being a debut. Go back a few years when nu metal was a huge deal and there were great bands and albums involved. Coming from Armenian descent and formed in Glendale, California, System of a Down were something different even by rock and nu metal standards. In 1998, the self-titled album from the wildly loud and chaotic System of a Down turned everyone's heads and piqued interest. That interest stayed for years. Many people discovered this band through Toxicity, and that's great, but I was young when I first heard the song Sugar in 1998 and it blew my little mind. My dad was in the car with me when it came on 105.7 The Point late at night at a red light, and I looked at him with a massively confused look on his face, and on my face was a big smile because I loved it. A classically trained singer working with a wild madman of a singer guitarist working together to shake everything up established in formatting and songwriting possible. Storytelling, political overtones, aggression, reflection, all that in a self-titled debut. System of a Down earned respect from the heavy music community by different ways and by being great. An album with such tonal difference between tracks like Sugar, Spiders, and Sweet Pea. That's a lot of variety. It also shows the many layers and ability of System of a Down. In my opinion, we need more variety and shock like this in rock today as well. Right after nu metal was fading and post-grunge was churning out the watered-down versions of itself, rock needed something different to stand out. As it turns out, that something different came in the form of electronic rock with some of the most upbeat songs you can imagine on a debut. Hot Fuss by the Killers in 2004 made instant stars across the world. They made it to the top from the moment they started. It's been almost 20 years since Hot Fuss came out, and I stand by that it still holds up, it has aged greatly, and it's the Killers' best album. That's not a shot at their other albums, which are great also, but the Killers introduced themselves with something so special that the band may never top it. This was also a style that really was not dominant in mainstream rock or top 40 at the time, and the Killers got singles like Somebody Told Me and Mr. Brightside into both of those fields. I'm pretty sure Mr. Brightside has become the British national anthem at this point as well. They still love it there like it's new. Coming out of Las Vegas was a band obsessed with Duran Duran and New Order who wanted to take rock music and make it a dance party. The Killers succeeded with Hot Fuss. That makes Vegas the home of gambling, depravity, hangovers, and one of the best debuts from a band ever. Interesting list. Few bands are credited for the music of a generation and change of culture like Nirvana. Bleach, however, is the rare case of a debut album being discovered and made popular after a follow-up album was made famous. After Nevermind changed the world and grunge had a true definition, people went back in time to discover Nirvana's first full album, Bleach, which showed the real roots of how grunge bloomed from the 80s. It was an act of musical talent as well as defiance in the time to release an album like Bleach in 1989, when this was not the popular sound in rock. When Kurt and Kurst got together to make something influenced by sludge metal, they wanted to make something polished in the music and urbane side of themselves, with lyrics not even being a priority. That set Nirvana down the path of music history. Bleach is such a strong first step as a full LP that set the tone for Nirvana, showed off what Kurt was all about as a musician, so much happening from an album for people to go back to find. Nirvana's classics like About a Girl and the Love Buzz cover could fit in any point in Nirvana's timeline, as could most of the album. Just over 37 minutes on an original recording and retrospectively rated as a classic by fans and critics alike, Bleach is an important part of grunge even if it's predated the actual grunge era. We didn't know how good of a thing we had with Kurt Cobain in 1989. Just like teenagers in the 70s worshipped AC/DC, teenagers worshipped Linkin Park starting in the year 2000. It didn't take long after Hybrid Theory dropped with a single One Step Closer that not only the youth but every rock fan around started losing their minds over the next big band with 2 vocalists and a DJ. Hybrid Theory was the next evolution in nu metal, rap rock, and rock in general, and everyone knew it. When radio started blasting Linkin Park non-stop and pumping out singles for well over a year, it was obvious Hybrid Theory was going to be a massive deal for a long time. It's one of the best-selling albums in history. Chester and Mike knew how to speak for a generation, and the music behind them was the perfect sound for that era. Mike Shinoda said that the group was actually a bit miserable during the creation and recording process. It was worth the struggle. Most musicians would legitimately do unspeakable things to have the debut success that Linkin Park had. One Step Closer became famous, Crawling won a Grammy, and in the end became one of the most sing-along songs ever. You cannot hear In the End and not sing along with it. You can't. Hybrid Theory was the perfect introduction for Linkin Park, as well as making it a banner anthem for that style in 2000. It was the perfect timing for this album to arrive, as it's one of the albums of 2000s in rock that aged well. For 2000s nu metal and rap rock, that's a miracle. Few bands can ever lay claim to having one of the best guitarists ever, if not the best guitarist, and even fewer actually have the debut album to back it up. Van Halen was a game changer for guitar lovers the day it was released in 1978. Rock music in general was changed when the world was introduced to David Lee Roth as a powerhouse frontman as well. Over 40 years later, and Van Halen, the album, is still being praised. That cover of You Really Got Me was an amazing introduction to what Van Halen was as a group, with the attitude, the style, all of it. Then when listeners bought the album, heard Eruption, and understood how Eruption was played, it was the mind-blowing experience music lovers needed to become lifelong fans. Runnin' with the Devil is a great opener for an album and first entry for a band for the public. Did it rile up the moms against metal and rock? Probably, but those moms were eventually rocking out to Van Halen also, only furthering that point that Van Halen made an amazing debut. That Van Halen logo written on notebooks across high schools for years wasn't just because it was a fun logo to draw. The music represented everything rock needed. To this day, the argument is still if the album, or 1984, is Van Halen's best, and it's extremely difficult to make, but it's so impressive that their first album was such a loud, impressive introduction with plenty of DLR yelling his head off. It's exactly what rock was supposed to be.
Now you do what they told you.
I truly feel this is the debut album that does not get enough credit as a debut. When people think of Rage Against the Machine, they think of the many songs, the messages, the lyrics, Tom Morello being a wizard with his guitar and effects, but rarely does the 1991 self-titled album get the credit it deserves as a debut album. Zach had a lot to say over the years, and what's in this album is as timeless as it ever was. This is one of the most impactful bands of a single decade ever. The 90s will always be associated with Rage Against the Machine for me, and in 1992, when I was way too young to be listening to music like this, even I was able to understand the anger and intention behind the music. This was forceful while being creative. There's a reason so many artists and bands put respect on the name Rage Against the Machine, because you knew they stood up for what they sang with, and the debut was 4 men putting themselves out there in a wildly different way. It was going against the system in a deeply patriotic country while making some of the best music in that format that still is appropriate for today. Even in recent years, post-pandemic, when Rage returned to that arena tour, hearing so many people in unison screaming freedom and singing along to Killing in the Name proves to me that this debut meant a lot more than just a young Midwest child listening to it. It still holds up for many. Are You Experience proved that even if Jimi Hendrix was in his 20s when this debut came out, he still could blow everyone out of the water. Every other guitarist in 1967 knew they were being blown out of the water too. It was instantly obvious when Hendrix was being put on main stages. You can be innovative, you can be a performer, but only one person can be Jimi Hendrix, and only one art guitarist, but only one person can be Jimi Hendrix, and only one guitarist can be a part of the Jimi Hendrix experience and debut like this. Are You Experience was responsible for so many people using their guitar more creatively. For decades, Hendrix was the inspiration for aspiring guitarists to want to pick up and play while not just strumming the same 4 chords. Regardless of whether it was the European International version or the North America version, it doesn't matter. Are You Experience had everything to prove what Hendrix needed to convince, as well as being the best inspiration for psychedelic rock imaginable at a time where that was a massive deal. Are You Experience has more experimentation and psychedelic style in the album than anything like it released in the last 20 years. It's that perfectly timed example of standing out in the best way and making sure no one forgets you because of how great the music is. And this was his beginning. Begs the question of what Hendrix would have accomplished if he had stayed around longer with the advances in technology. Who knows how far he could have gone with that guitar.
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and games. We got
As soon as Appetite for Destruction came out, it opened up Pandora's box in rock. Even in the 80s, when rock was celebrated for being out of control, Guns N' Roses one-upped everyone with making something loud, but at the same time extremely skilled and well-presented. Appetite for Destruction made instant superstars the world over. Destruction took over for years because of the strength of this debut. That first experience of hearing Welcome to the Jungle was enough to latch into any rock fan back in the late 80s. And that voice from Axl, the riff from Slash, it all oozed charisma and that appeal for debauchery in rock. There was so much gusto and wild abandon for the system in those before, GNR came out guns a-blazing. Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City, and Welcome to the Jungle are still constantly played on radio, on TV, in movie soundtracks, and endlessly at sporting events. And that's just 3 songs. Then add the many other big songs on the album that diehard GNR fans adore, all topped off with a top hat. You get that lightning in a bottle of arguably the best of that style and subgenre in the 80s. I understand the argument from those saying Appetite for Destruction is the best debut ever. I do think a big part of that was the wild shenanigans of Axl Rose both on stage and behind the scenes, but it's undeniable that this is one of the best debuts for any band ever, including rock. Everyone has done an Axl impression, and chances are it's an impression from a song from Appetite for Destruction. Grunge was becoming an established lifestyle after putting to bed glam and hair metal while introducing some of the biggest new bands in the world. When the deep voice of Eddie Vedder was brought to the light and flesh out the group Pearl Jam, everything changed. 10 was the album that proved grunge wasn't just attitude or disheveled apathy or rebellion, but a range of emotions and some of the best music ever. I easily stand by that 10 is the best debut rock album for several reasons. 1, a debut band was able to stand out massively in an already popular style with competition such as Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden. Those are the heaviest of hitters for the early 90s, and for 10 to become so well loved speaks to the album's power. 2, the execution and proficiency by Mike McCready and Stone Gossard on guitars to handle so many styles and keys and riffs and shredding, all while having each song give a different performance entirely. You never feel once that Pearl Jam is phoning in a track or placing something for filler. If anything, 10 does the impossible of making each song stand out. 3, Eddie Vedder's debut with Pearl Jam became an instant classic. His singing had the bitterness in Black, the bombast in Alive and Why Go, the haunting performance of Jeremy. 10 showed everyone that Eddie Vedder was going to be a musician to be remembered from the day 10 dropped in 1991. 4, 10 was the album that perfectly encapsulated what it meant to be in the moment at that time in the early 90s, while still connecting to present day. Eddie Vedder said about 10, "All I really believe in is this moment, like right now." And that actually is what the whole album talks about. When you listen to 10 and the amazing music along with the lyrics being heard, it's a time capsule while also being relatable as you get older. That's further proof, along with those other points, why Pearl Jam's 10 is the best debut in rock. And that was a look at the top 10 best debut rock albums. What did you think is the best rock debut? Leave a comment, let everyone know. Big thanks to my YouTube members and patrons, and special thanks to Chris Doman, Clark Walden, and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon and through YouTube memberships. Click the join button below or the link in the video description for more info on how you can help the channel. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. For those who are about to leave the comment of, "You forgot," fill in the blank, I know, I personally left that one out to spite you. I hope this video keeps you up at night.